Good evening. State Representative Emanuel Welch here, coming to you with another one of my Facebook Live conversations. Tonight, I am joined by some of my colleagues from the other side of the aisle. These guys are friends of mine. We have some spirited debates. Sometimes we agree, sometimes we disagree. And sometimes we take those policy debates to Twitter, Facebook, you name it. So tonight, we're bringing it here live to you via my Facebook Live. I want to introduce my friends from the other side of the aisle, tell you a little bit about each one of them, and then we'll jump right to it. Joining me tonight is Representative Keith Wheeler. He is an assistant Republican leader. He's an Oswego resident, married with 3 kids, and we often get to meet his young daughter who comes down and assists him through the chamber from time to time. He's a small business owner for the last 20 plus years, past chairman of the National Federation of Independent Businesses, and past chairman of the Aurora Regional Chamber of Commerce. He is the Republican spokesperson on the House Executive Committee, and so we get to work together quite closely and have some very spirited discussions. Representative Grant Worley, welcome, Keith. Representative Grant Worley, another assistant Republican leader, lifelong resident of Naperville, married with 2 sons, holds a commercial pilot license. And he got his aviation degree from one of our fine state universities, Southern Illinois University at Carbondale. So he also served on the Naperville City Council for about a decade before joining us in the House. And he also is a member of the House Executive Committee, and he's only allowed on the committee because he calls me Chairman Cool. Welcome.
We're going to have to revisit that.
You know I wasn't going to let you get away with that. And then, of course, this is my buddy who I like to have panel discussions with at school board conferences and things of that nature. And we decided to take the show on the road. Representative Tom Bennett, who was raised in Gibson City, married with 2 grown children, former IT manager for a national insurance company, former high school science teacher, and a corporate computer software developer. He also served almost 2 decades on the Parkland Community College Board. Welcome, gentlemen. Thank you all for joining me here tonight.
Thanks, Chris.
Thank you. Glad to be with you.
You know, I want to just jump right into it. And why don't we start with you, Keith, Grant, then Tom, based on seniority, I guess. Tell us a little bit about your district. And keep in mind, we're only around for about a half hour or so.
All right, I'll keep it relatively brief. Thank you, Chris. Thanks for hosting us tonight. I represent the 50th District, which is the very far west suburbs. I call it where farm ground meets suburbia. So it starts in St. Charles, goes south all the way to Yorkville, kind of has Route 47, is a kind of a middle line. And so it's kind of a mix of small rural towns, a little bit of suburbia, and then I'm also fortunate to represent the west side, or most of the west side, of Aurora, which is Illinois' 2nd largest city. So for a kid who grew up in a farm town that turned into a suburb, this is a district that fits me pretty well.
How many representatives represent Aurora? I know Representative Kifowit, Hernandez.
Via's got the far east side.
Wow, there's a lot of you guys out there.
Yeah, about 4 of us.
Yeah. Grant, tell us a little bit about the Naperville area.
So first off, Chris, thanks for having us. It's vitally important that we have bipartisan conversations. So I'm glad to be here. It's always fun to be with you. So Naperville, I'm born and raised here. It's, I've seen it change from a farm town when I was a kid to what it is now. I go into a little bit of South Warrenville. Al's Pizza's in my district, some of the best pizza around. But I've seen the change happen here in my community from a farm town to where it is now. I like to think we're a model of success. We have, I know we're going to be talking about law enforcement, healthcare. You look at some of the things that we have going on in the 41st district out here in Naperville, and I think we need to duplicate it around our great state. So thanks again for having us.
Hey, Tom Bennett's actually been out to my district. We drove around and I showed him around the Great 7th District, and I owe him a visit to his district.
Thank you, Chris. That was great. That was a great time that day we spent together a little bit. Really enjoyed that. My district is East Central Illinois. It's of course, 108,000 people, about like everybody else as far as districts go and representatives. I think my district is probably geographically one of the largest in the state. It's about 62 small towns, villages, communities, small business, agriculture, just a lot of good things going on, but good people.
I want to ask you guys about what everyone's been talking about the last couple of weeks, and really want my audience to hear what you all have to say in particular. Tom, I'm going to start with you this time and ask you, have you seen the video of George Floyd being murdered pretty much in broad daylight? Officer on his neck for 8 minutes and 45 seconds. And did you watch it? And what was your reaction?
Yes, I did. I watched it more than once, and there were different versions of the video out there as well. And it's hard to put in words, right? The disgust, the disbelief, the anger, and then when you could see he stopped breathing, you just knew, and it just that can't be going on. It just can't be. So.
Grant, did you watch it?
I did, and I'll be honest, it took me more than once to get through the whole thing.
Yeah.
It's just horrific to watch. I mean, you absolutely see the moment when his last breath leaves him. It's heartbreaking. It's not what should be happening to anyone, anywhere, at any time. It broke my heart. That it's horrific, and it is murder. There's no doubt in my mind that is 100% murder.
Rep Wheeler.
Yeah, Chris, I've watched it several times. I've went back and as new footage emerged and tried to understand the timeline, just the different angles that have become available. It makes everything very clear that it's shocking, it's saddening, it's hard to imagine that anything like that could take place in our communities in our lifetimes right now. I just can't imagine it.
As you guys know, we're streaming this to my personal Facebook page, my official page. The debate on social media the last couple of weeks has been all over the place, and it's gotten very partisan in many ways. Is the George Floyd murder being talked about in your districts? And what's the conversation like? Grant, why don't we start with you?
It is absolutely being talked about, and it's talked about in how horrific it is, how we can't allow that to happen. And I'm hearing from people that I never hear from saying you have to do something about this, and I 100% agree with that. And it is making us have the conversations that are painful to some, that are they keep us up at night. But I'm hoping that some good come out of this, that we can get some reforms, so that we can make sure that this doesn't happen again to anyone. So out of pure evil, hopefully some good will come.
I well said, Grant. I couldn't agree with that more. Keith, what's the conversation like in the Oswego area about this?
Chris, it's all over the map as far as the people who just want to make a short point and say that we've got to make sure these officers are held accountable for what happened. Discussions about how law enforcement should handle these kinds of situations. Subduing a suspect versus killing someone in police custody are two they should never cross. All the way to what police reforms are necessary. What should we be doing to address the accountability issue from a state perspective, but also balance that. Maybe we need more training. What are the answers on mental health for officers and how they do their jobs? Most people, in my neighborhood would believe that cops do a good job. They try hard. 99% of the guys are true public servants and work their ass off to do a good job for all of us. But at the same time, they got to wear the jacket for what just happened. And it's happened more than one time, obviously, recently. We've also finally gotten to discussions about racism. And, just getting that conversation started is, I think, very important. And then trying to understand better how communities of color might see, law enforcement, how they might see economic opportunity in the American dream in different ways than maybe what I do or what my family grew up with. So that's a conversation that's so important for us to have. And that's why I'm grateful for you leading us today.
Hey, Tom, is Gibson City in your current district, or that's just where
Sure.
you were?
It's in the kind of the center basically of our district, and that's where I live at today.
What's the conversation like in your area?
It started out with disgust, disbelief, almost like, and you don't always know what people are talking about when they're watching through the day, et cetera. But it got to the point where there's anger. It's like, what in the world is happening? Everything looks so wrong on the video that they're going back to that one with the 8:46, the 8 minutes 46 video. Thoughts that this should have been handled totally differently. That man should not have died in police custody. Just a lot of those questions. Of course, same time, there's support overall for our police and those sorts of things. But when it comes to this situation, it really caused everybody to pause, I think, if I may say that, Chris. And it's the topic around the racism and how do we get better. Those are some things that I think are part of where we are today.
I'm talking to three of my friends from the other side of the aisle. And yes, they are my friends. We don't always agree on policy. We disagree strongly sometimes. But these guys are friends of mine. We visited with each other, had dinner with each other, and occasionally a beer or two. It's important that we have these bipartisan discussions. And I want to welcome leader Kathleen Willis, who is watching, guys. And she says hello to you all, just to show the mutual admiration that a lot of us have for each other, despite our differences sometimes. Want to ask you guys, there's been a lot of civil unrest, not just in Chicago. There was some in Naperville, Aurora, all across the state, and of course across the country. Keith, let's start with you, because Aurora, it was a little crazy out there for a while.
Yeah, we were
what's your reaction to the civil unrest that occurred?
Well, first I want to say how much I appreciate the idea of the peaceful protests that have been going on, because I think that's very American, and it's kind of the heart of what we're really about as a country, of how we communicate with each other. Sometimes when things are wrong, we got to make sure everybody else knows it and understands it. So that part I'm all in favor of, and truly do appreciate the violence, the rioting, the looting that happened in Aurora. Naturally, that can't happen. It doesn't help the process move along towards reform, which is what I think we all want to see. So moving along in that direction, I mean, the peaceful protests are great. Obviously, the violent stuff we've got to keep a lid on. And I think that, from my perspective, at least in our area, that's where things have been going. We've had a lot of good peaceful protests, might be a little smaller in different communities, but they're happening, and they're happening in a way now that's in the conversation. That's what we want to see. I'm
going to ask you guys about your thoughts on reform, but you mentioned looting, Keith, and I just want to say sometimes it's important to understand the why things happen. And, we were all home for the last 10 to 12 weeks. People are unemployed. They have no income coming in. People are struggling in our country right now. Record unemployment across the country, record unemployment here. And we have to come up with some policy solutions as the policy makers. And we have to address why people would feel the need to go out and do those types of things. Now, don't get me wrong. There's provocateurs and opportunists who are going to go out there and just do things for all the wrong reasons. But I do think we have to find some common ground and try to address the why in these conversations as well. Grant, Naperville, you guys saw some of this civil unrest. What are your thoughts?
We did. Well, peaceful protest is what America is really all about. You can address your government. It's not afforded to people around the world, and it should be. So I am 100% with protesting and working towards change in a peaceful manner. But sadly, when it turns violent and the looting starts and destruction of property, what that has, in my opinion, is it takes people who were open-minded and it shuts down their mind a little bit. It closes their ears. It makes them want to shut the door or get off of social media and not interact and have these conversations. So it's counterproductive in what we're trying to do. Chris, you brought up poverty. I certainly would not classify Naperville as a place with an abundance of poverty. Do we have it? Yes, but it's really not that prevalent here. But what can we do to help end poverty elsewhere? That is something that I am looking forward to working with you and everybody in the General Assembly to, we talk about food deserts, the unavailability of food in certain areas. We need to end that. We need to make sure that everybody has the opportunity that so many see Naperville for having, and rightfully so. We need to make sure that everyone has opportunity to succeed, whether that's education, healthcare, you name it. We need to make Illinois and our nation even better.
Yeah. Tom, I didn't really hear news of civil unrest in your area. Anything?
No, not real. Turns up and down the interstate. One of our part of our district overflow of some of that, but a couple of lawful protests, walks, but nothing like what we saw in Chicago or in the areas. But I want to go back to that just a minute before we go further. But and what I heard, what I felt was just there's so many different groups involved with this, Chris. But every one of these groups, we're talking about a large amount of pain. And that pain is real for all kinds of reasons. And I think what we need to do is find some way right now, we're not talking with each other, we're talking past each other. And until we can do that and really sit down, and that thing's what we're saying here earlier, until we actually sit down and listen, get where we need to get to, and that's solutions. I think part of the reason we're here today is how do we get to where we need to get to so we can talk about solutions. We've got to realize, yes, they're pain, but then we got to go to the next step is how do we listen to each other, try to get past that piece of it, because then we can get to the solutions. That's where we need to be.
I want to talk solutions for sure. I want to ask the two guys with young kids a question though. Keith, we get to meet your young daughter often in Springfield. Grant, you have a teenager at home. Have you guys talked about this issue with your kids? I mean, it's all over the news. You can't miss it. Are you having the important conversation right now? Keith?
Yes, is the answer. Chris, you met my daughter. She sat through our committee hearings with us a number of times. While she may be playing on an iPad sometimes when we're in committee, she's very tuned in to what's going on around her. And that includes not just the things that are in our family, but in our community, what we see on television. And everything that happened in the aftermath of the murder of George Floyd has gone on to be something we talk about every day. And it's by default, there's no way around it. It is the front and center news story of our lives. And she has questions, and she has some pretty keen insights for somebody who's 9 years old. And I appreciate the fact that she's tuned in and that she's open to the idea of discussing things and asking questions about how did we get here and why is it like this? And I love having those discussions with her.
Grant, what do you tell a teenager?
Well, hey, a teenage boy is a challenge in its own right, but it's the influence of social media. So he has some very pointed and direct questions, and that's part of what makes our family so great is we're going to have these conversations, and it's you try to instill the best that you possibly can, and you just hope that it takes, and it's through repeat conversations. Be kind. If you see something that you don't agree with, say something. Stand up for people that need your help. Be the person that others are going to come to in times of crisis. But a 16-year-old turning on the news right now, I can't even imagine what is going through his head. And we just listen. Guys don't talk a lot as it is, so to get him to really come out of his shell, it can be somewhat of a challenge at times. But when he does, it's really insightful. We're trying to tamper down some of the social media aspects of it because it's so easy. And listen, Chris, you know me on social media. It's really easy to fire something off and not really think about the repercussions of it. So it's trying to keep that in check.
Yeah. Well, let me tell you guys, I have an 8-year-old and 6-year-old. You guys have met them both. And, you have to have these conversations. And my kids see, I'm a news junkie. They see what's on the TV many times. And they don't understand why everyone thinks so bad of the police officers. So you have to have that conversation. And one of the things I've underscored to them is that not all police officers are bad. There's bad people in every profession, and you shouldn't cast a broad brush on everyone. But I will tell you, I was extremely touched when one of my police chiefs texted me that my kids had dropped off care packages to police officers all over town. And he said, that was a great idea. I'm like, what are you talking about? He said, yeah, they just dropped off. They went all around town and found police officers and dropped off care packages and a nice note to thank them for what they do. And I didn't know. The chief actually broke news to me that day. And I'm glad they get the message that, not all police officers are bad, but we do have to work and put some systems in place that's going to root out these bad ones. And that's important because I do believe we have some systemic problems. So, Tom, I'm going to ask you, where can we start? All three of you guys have reached out to me and said, hey, I want to help. And so I'm going to ask you to help. Where do you think we can start?
Let me share with something, if I may. I've been talking with some of course, our law enforcement in the area, and I want to mention one. His name is Tony Childress. He's the sheriff of Livingston County. He's a Black African-American. He's been in law enforcement for 20 just a tremendous individual. And he's had recently the opportunity to share his concerns, need for police reform for both me and at the federal level. And he's focused on three things that I think we morning, but I don't know what all happened yet today. But here's what he was talking about: escalation training. That sounds like a good idea to do this. He also mentioned prohibition of all physical restraint maneuvers above the neck and restriction of blood or oxygen to the brain unless. And the third thing the sheriff said is mandatory for law enforcement to render medical aid to all. And those are three things. He may have had some more, but those are things that he and I talked about more. And I think those are things that could be helpful. And we really need to look at those from that perspective. And bottom line, people should not have to live in fear of their government. That's just part of it.
Grant, what's some reform you think could be helpful here that you could support?
So a couple of things. In 2015, then President Obama came out with his 21st century policing. It's sort of a model on what we can do to go forward. I know the city of Naperville adopted 5 of those 5 principles as a community. It's use of restraint. It's being accredited by an outside agency. So, other people coming in to take a look at what your policies and procedures are as a department. There's just a couple of examples. I mean, legislatively in Springfield, the bad cop bill. Police officers do get fired in the state of Illinois. It's kind of a challenge.
It's not easy, Grant. I mean, I've talked to a number of my mayors, and they're like, these CBAs are very hindering sometimes.
They are. I mean, they are, and I'm willing to look at that. But when a law enforcement officer does get fired from a municipality, they're hired somewhere else. So now they're fired somewhere, they're mad, and now they're picked up somewhere else, and they're taking it out on the streets. So we need to find a way, and I know this legislation's been offered in the past, it's a bad cop bill. Listen, I'm a pilot by training. You mentioned that in the introduction. I don't want a bad pilot. I don't want a bad Apple pilot that can only land occasionally. I mean, I just don't. I don't want a bad cop either. And if you talk to law enforcement officials, they don't want them either. So if we can look at something that looks at the firing, I mean, I don't even want to call him a gentleman, the officer in the George Floyd murder had how many beefs on his record? Something like
21.
17? 21. I mean, how is he still on the beat? It's ridiculous. So we need to look at bad cop bill, and once somebody loses their opportunity to in one municipality, they shouldn't just be picked up somewhere else.
Keith, any thoughts on reform?
Yeah, well, first, to me, Chris, it starts with a discussion like this, where we're having a conversation and trying to understand how people see things differently, because we all have different experiences, and any opportunity we have to explore the interaction between the public and law enforcement, starting there, I guess, and going all the way forward, is something that maybe I haven't done enough of, but I want to examine that process better with everybody. I know that in my discussion with local law enforcement, they're looking for different levels of support, not just financial support, but other kinds of training. And like I said, I'm going to go back to the idea of mental health. To me, that looks like a situation here where there's something missing with what happened in Minnesota, what happens other places, and even what happens locally. I know a couple of instances of Aurora cops, maybe they've been on Facebook lately, or at least on social media, with the dash cam, and people asking questions. Why did this happen this way, and this stop or this arrest? So there's a whole level of understanding that maybe we all need to step back and kind of understand the officer's perspective, but more importantly, the public's perspective.
Guys, we only have about 5-10 minutes left. I want to make sure Grant gets to cook dinner for the family tonight.
Thanks. My family appreciates that.
And not get in any trouble. I want to kind of ask a couple quick questions. Give me your first thoughts. Your first thought that comes to mind. Grant, Black Lives Matter.
Yes, Black Lives Matter. Black businesses matter. We need to do a better job as a society to making sure that we're all given opportunity. How short do you want it, Chris? I mean,
Tom, Black Lives Matter. What does that mean to you?
Black children, Black families, Black jobs. Grant mentioned Black businesses, and basically the Black Lives Matter.
Keith, Black Lives Matter.
Chris, I believe every Black life matters. It's disappointing to me that not everyone may be able to say that or feel that way. I know I have neighbors and I have family members that are Black, and my colleagues that are Black. I love working with you. I love the collaboration we get to have. It'd be really hard for me not to look in the eyes of my two Black nephews and not be able to overwhelmingly convince them that they matter to me. They matter all the way.
Tom, if I say to you the term defund the police, give me your reaction.
Well, what I think it means, the idea of defending police has to do with divest funds from police department budgets, is what I recall, and reallocating them to non-police forms of public safety, like social services and other community resources. So that's what I was picking up from that perspective. But with that, 80% of our police budgets are personnel, and I do not support eliminating police positions. The majority of our law enforcement are dedicated, highly professional, and they're part of a national team that enforces laws and stop crime. And they really do a strong effort, a good job. But maybe instead of defund, I would consider investments for additional resources for our police departments. Keith, for example, mentioned something about mental health. It's a tough world. It's a tough job. And we
defund the police. What does that mean to you?
I think that means different things based on geography. I really do. I think defunding police in my district is not a good idea. They're very well trained. They're nationally certified. They go through mental health training. They go through de-escalation training. We scrub our budgets very tight. I spent 10 years on the Naperville City Council, so that is something that in my district I'm not supportive of. However, when you look at some of the practices elsewhere, we need to look at what they're spending their money on and what sort of training they're getting and what sort of standards are they intending to meet. So I don't think it's a one-size-fits-all approach, but I understand why some people might say that based on what's happening in current events.
Keith?
Yeah, I get the idea of defunding the police would imply that we're going to apply those funds to other services that might reduce crime or provide a better quality of living for different communities. But in my discussions with local law enforcement, nationally, they're not interested in that. But talking to Richard Irvin is the mayor of Aurora. He's a friend of mine. He's African American. He's a wonderful person. And I asked him about this question. I said, you're dealing with the second largest city in the state. And he said, we can't defund our police department. We've got to actually increase funding and shore up what we're doing wrong. And he goes, I need flexibility in what we can do with our funding. He goes, should we invest in community training or community relations and community outreach and mental health training and things I think we talked about before? He goes, or what we get a lot of funding opportunities for is paramilitary equipment. We don't need that. And I agree with him. We don't need that.
Well, now you guys all know, because I'm pretty consistent year after year. I would like to see more social workers in our school and less police officers in our school. So when I hear the term defund the police, I think that it's a reallocation of resources. And I hear you guys, and it sounds like there's a lot of room for agreement there. And call it what you may, but there seems like there's a lot of room for some agreement here. And definitely investing in mental health services is extremely important. Go ahead, Grant.
Can I just follow up on the school resource officers? I actually talked to the Naperville Chief of Police yesterday on this, and we've had success with that. It is a good interaction. So if that's something that works for your community, great. I'll support it. But if it's working in certain areas, I don't want to take it away. And it's, I think our schools would be less safe if we took the SROs out of the schools.
Let's talk about that. Let me ask you as a good question to end on. We're almost at the 30-minute mark. And Grant, I'm going to come to you because I think I saw on Twitter a couple days ago, you tweeted something about General Colin Powell.
So-
And what's your admiration of General Colin Powell? And then I'm going to ask you guys to give me an African-American figure in the political space that you guys admire.
So I'm an avid reader, at least I used to be a lot more before I came into the General Assembly, of U.S. history, military history, and leadership. And I've read extensively about Colin Powell. And here's an individual that born in Harlem, and went the military route. Next thing you know, he's the Joint Chiefs of Staff, chairman of it, the first African American to hold that position. Then he's appointed to Secretary of State, first African American to hold that. But then it dovetails into another African American leader that I admire, and that's Condoleezza Rice, who, born in Birmingham, Alabama. Her biggest downfall, in my opinion, is she went to Notre Dame, but I digress. And then she becomes the first female African American Secretary of State. So there's leadership that we can look to for guidance. And sometimes we agree, sometimes we disagree with their styles and their techniques. But given opportunity, people can succeed. And those are two that I just wish I had more time to read up on.
Well, I thought you were going to say you admired Chairman Cool, but we'll take General Powell. Keith.
Well, first of all, I admire Chairman Cool. Let's be honest here.
Yeah. Okay.
I want to take things a little different direction for a personal reason. I'm thinking about a hero of mine growing up. I want to mention Walter Payton. And here's why. I grew up with him. My posters are on my wall growing up as a kid. I admired his determination, his leadership, his work ethic. As I learned more about him getting older, that he was just a special person in that respect. My wife will joke with you probably that there's more pictures of Walter Payton in my house than there are pictures of her to this day. If you go to my basement, you guys are welcome to come over anytime. But since Walter's passing, I gotten through mutual friends to know Connie Payton and her kids, Jared and Brittany, and I really admire Walter now as I see his influence as a father, what he left behind, and a legacy with those two beautiful people. And I want to tie it back because I saw a post from Brittany a couple of days ago on Facebook, maybe it was a week ago, that her and her mom had to deal with racial intolerance in the midst of all this just so recently. It just broke my heart that she's going through that. And it kind of hit home with me. So that's why I wanted to bring up Walter and his family in this case.
Tom, I'll give you the final word before we close out.
There's a lady by the name of Zulema Harris. Probably most of us have not really heard much about her. She was the youngest child born and raised in the 40s and 50s to a rural East Texan farm family. And she went from there to become a leading community college president in Illinois, in Missouri. She was Black. She was a woman. As I mentioned, she was raised in the 40s and 50s of our world, and just amazing. A couple quick stories, if I may. When she got a poor grade at her one-room schoolhouse for Blacks, if I may, Mom walked 1.5 miles to talk with the teacher to learn more. And that was the last low grade Zulema ever got. Mom held her feet to the fire going forward. And so she went on, Chris, to get her bachelor's, her master's, her doctorate degree. She was intelligent. She could focus on issues at hand with a passion, but perhaps most importantly, she had compassion. And I think it's what we're talking about here a little bit too. And to me, compassion is a game changer, because when she came to Parkin College as a president, and that's in Champaign, she memorized the pictures and the names of all 400 employees. I mean, you talk about an impact. And that's one of the many things that she did. And I was fortunate to work with her when I was a member of the Parkin College Board of Trustees, and she was the executive of the president there. She was there like 16 years, and I was on the board for 19. And so our paths crossed, and she was gracious, patient, but persistent, strong, but she was a tremendous leader. She brought Parkin College to the forefront of the Illinois community college system. And then she went on later to lead the largest community college system in Missouri. She just was amazing. But all this time, she also mentored a number of people along the way. It just was fun to watch her interact. But she loved people. She thought about it. She listened. Just a great role model in so many ways. So Dr. Zulema Harris, she's retired now. God bless her. A great lady. She's in California.
Thank you all for sharing that. You know, one of the things I say often when I speak about politics in Illinois is that, you know, people have the perception that we're very much like Washington, D.C. And I admit all the time, civility and compassion is lost on the national stage, but we have a lot of civility and compassion in the Illinois legislature. And I enjoy working with all of you guys, and we're going to have some deep policy discussions on police reform and addressing poverty here in the next few weeks and months. And I'm glad we were able to start with a small conversation here tonight. So thank you all for joining me for a Facebook conversation. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Chris.
Chris, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Appreciate it.
Grant, you won't get in trouble. You get to make dinner tonight.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Have a good one, guys.
Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Bye.